In ancient Egypt, people lived in a land that was warm and dry most of the time. The sun rose high in the sky every morning, casting long shadows across the sandy landscape. Birds sang their songs as they flew from tree to tree, and animals moved quietly through the fields. People woke up early, stretching their arms and yawning before stepping outside or staying inside to begin their day. Each morning, people started their routine with one simple task: washing themselves. This was not just a habit, it was a way of life. They believed that being clean made them more pleasing to their gods. It also helped them stay healthy and strong. So they spent time each day making sure their bodies were washed and their clothes were clean. It was not something they rushed through. It was part of life, like eating or sleeping. Rich families had servants who helped bring water and prepare things for washing. Poorer families did everything themselves. But no matter how much money they had, everyone tried to be clean. Children learned from their parents how to wash properly. They watched as their mothers and fathers poured water over their hands and rubbed their faces. They copied what they saw and soon made it part of their own routine. Soap was not known in the way we know it today. Instead, people used mixtures of ash and oil or sand and water to scrub away dirt. These simple tools worked well enough for their needs. Over time, these habits became normal. No one needed to be told to wash their hands before eating. Everyone just knew it was the right thing to do. Being dirty was not liked in ancient Egypt. It was seen as disrespectful, especially when visiting temples or meeting important people. Even workers who built large buildings or farmed the fields tried to keep themselves clean when they could. They would rinse their mouths with water after eating and wipe their arms and legs with wet cloths during breaks. The Nile River was very important for cleaning. It provided fresh water for drinking, cooking, and bathing. Many people went to the river in the early morning to wash themselves before starting the day. Children played in the shallow parts while adults cleaned their bodies. It was a time for families to be together and take care of themselves. Being clean was not only about looks, it was also about health. People who washed often stayed healthier than those who did not. Their skin stayed smoother, their clothes smelled better, and they smiled more because they felt better. Over time, these habits became part of Egyptian culture. People passed them down from parent to child. Each new generation grew up knowing that being clean was important. It was not just something you did once in a while. It was something you did every day. So even though life was busy in ancient Egypt, people still found time to take care of themselves. They woke up early, washed their faces, dried off with cloth, and started the day feeling fresh. That is why personal hygiene was such a big part of their lives. People also talked about cleanliness in stories and songs. They told children that the gods loved those who were clean. They sang about the coolness of water and the joy of fresh clothes. These ideas stayed with people for their whole lives. Some people believed that being clean made their prayers stronger. If you went to a temple with dirty hands, the gods might not listen. So people made sure to wash carefully before going to worship. Priests were especially careful. They washed many times each day and never touched anything without first cleaning their hands. Cleanliness was also a sign of respect. When someone visited another home, they were expected to wash before entering. A guest who came in with dirty feet or unwashed hands was not welcome. Hosts always offered water so visitors could clean themselves before sitting down. Even animals were washed sometimes. Farmers rinsed donkeys and oxen after long days of work. Horses were cleaned before special events. Dogs were wiped with wet cloths when they got too dusty. Clean animals looked better and smelled better. Water was carried in jars or pots. These were heavy and took time to fill, but people did not complain. They knew water was important. They shared it with neighbors and made sure everyone had some. Children were taught to carry water at a young age. They helped their mothers and fathers bring it from the river. They learned how to pour it gently and how to store it safely. Carrying water was hard work, but it was also fun. It gave children a chance to spend time outside and help their families. Older people also washed regularly. Even if they could not go to the river, they used whatever water they had. They splashed their faces, wiped their arms, and changed their clothes when possible. Being old did not mean being dirty. People also washed after certain activities. After working in the fields, they rinsed their hands and arms. After walking a long way, they washed their feet. After eating, they rinsed their mouths with water. These small acts kept them clean throughout the day. Mothers made sure their children were clean before sending them out to play or helping with chores. They wiped their faces, checked their clothes, and made sure their hair was brushed. Clean children were happy children. These morning habits were passed down through generations. Children watched their parents and learned what to do. Soon, they were doing it on their own without being told. It became a normal part of life. So every morning, no matter how rich or poor someone was, they started the day the same way. They washed their face, dried off, put on clean clothes, and ate breakfast. It was simple, quiet, and peaceful, and it set the tone for the whole day ahead. Cleanliness was not just about looking good. It was about feeling good. People who were clean slept better, smiled more, and talked kindly to others. They felt ready for whatever the day might bring. In short, daily hygiene was a big part of life in ancient Egypt. People did not need books or signs to remind them. They just knew it was important. From the moment they woke up until the time they went to sleep, they tried to stay clean in body and mind. They washed their hands. They washed their face. They washed their arms. They dried with cloth. They smiled. They breathed deeply. They felt clean. Every morning, the same thing happened again and again. The sun rose, the birds sang, the water flowed, and people, young and old, rich and poor, stood by their basins and bowls and began their day the same way. They washed their hands. They washed their face. They washed their arms. They dried with cloth. They smiled. They breathed deeply. They felt clean. In ancient Egypt, each morning began the same way. The sun rose slowly over the horizon. Birds sang quietly in the trees. Animals stirred in their pens or wandered through the fields. People opened their eyes and stretched their arms. They sat up slowly and looked around. The house was still quiet for a moment. Then, one by one, they stood up and began their day. Before doing anything else, people washed their hands and face. This was the first thing they did every morning. Some used water from a small bowl. Others had basins made of stone or clay. Water was poured gently into their hands. They rubbed their face and arms. Then they dried off with cloth. The cloth was soft and warm from the sun. Felt nice against their skin. Some people added oil to their skin after washing. This oil came from plants like olives or sesame seeds. It helped protect the skin from the dry air. Women sometimes used a paste made from crushed flowers or herbs. It smelled nice and kept their skin smooth. Men also cared for their skin. They rubbed oil on their faces after shaving. Shaving was common, especially among men who worked in temples or palaces. Children watched their parents and copied them. They poured water into bowls. They splashed it onto their faces. They dried off with cloth. Parents taught them to wash before eating and after waking up. It was a rule in many homes, even if it wasn't written down. It was just understood that you should be clean before touching food. Fresh clothes were important. After washing, people put on clean linen garments. Most clothing was white because it showed dirt easily and reminded people when it needed washing again. Clothes were folded neatly and stored in baskets or boxes. Some people burned incense to make their home smell nice. Others used flowers or oils to make themselves smell better. Bad smells were not liked. People believed that bad smells could bring bad luck or make people sick. Smelling good was part of being clean. People used oils and perfumes to feel fresh. These oils came from plants and sometimes had sweet smells. People liked to feel smooth and clean after a morning routine. It gave them confidence and made them feel ready for the day ahead. Breakfast was simple: bread, dates, onions, maybe some fish or fruit. Before eating, people always washed their hands again. This was done without thinking. Everyone knew to do it. No one needed to be reminded. Being clean was not only about looking good. It was also about staying healthy. Workers who built pyramids or farmed the land also followed morning routines. They might not have had time to bathe, but they still washed their faces and hands before starting work. Some carried small pots of oil to rub on their skin during the day. This kept them cool and protected from the sun. Mothers made sure their children were clean before sending them out to play or helping with chores. They wiped their faces, checked their clothes, and made sure their hair was brushed. Clean children were happy children. These habits were passed down through generations. Children watched their parents and learned what to do. Soon, they were doing it on their own without being told. It became a normal part of life. So every morning, no matter how rich or poor someone was, they started the day the same way. They washed their face, dried off, put on clean clothes, and ate breakfast. It was simple, quiet, and peaceful, and it set the tone for the whole day ahead. Being clean was not just about looks. It was about feeling good. People who were clean slept better, smiled more, and talked kindly to others. They felt ready for whatever the day might bring. Morning routines were not only about looking clean, they were also about feeling good. People who started their day fresh and clean felt happier and more ready to work. They smiled more and talked to others with kindness. Even poor families tried to follow these routines. They might not have had fancy basins or expensive oils, but they still washed their faces and hands. They used whatever tools they had, bowls, jars, or even leaves to wipe themselves. Cleanliness was not about having the best things. It was about taking care of yourself every day. Rich families had servants who helped bring water and prepare things for washing. Poorer families did everything themselves. But no matter how much money they had, everyone tried to be clean. Children learned from their parents how to wash properly. They watched as their mothers and fathers poured water over their hands and rubbed their faces. They copied what they saw and soon made it part of their own routine. People believed that being clean made them more pleasing to their gods. They also thought it helped them stay healthy and strong. So they spent time each day making sure their bodies were washed and their clothes were clean. It was not something they rushed through. It was part of life, like eating or sleeping. Water was carried in jars or pots. These were heavy and took time to fill, but people did not complain. They knew water was important. They shared it with neighbors and made sure everyone had some. Older people also washed regularly. Even if they could not go to the river, they used whatever water they had. They splashed their faces, wiped their arms, and changed their clothes when possible. Being old did not mean being dirty. People also washed after certain activities. After working in the fields, they rinsed their hands and arms. After walking a long way, they washed their feet. After eating, they rinsed their mouths with water. These small acts kept them clean throughout the day. They washed their hands. They washed their face. They washed their arms. They dried with cloth. They smiled. They breathed deeply. They felt clean. Every morning, the same thing happened again and again. The sun rose, the birds sang, the water flowed, and people, young and old, rich and poor, stood by their basins and bowls and began their day the same way. They washed their hands. They washed their face. They washed their arms. They dried with cloth. They smiled. They breathed deeply. They felt clean. In ancient Egypt, people used water to keep their bodies clean. Water was important for many things. It was used for drinking, cooking, and washing. People believed that being clean was good for the body and the soul. So they made sure to use water every day. Bathing was not done every day by everyone. For many people, it was a weekly thing. Rich families had rooms in their homes where they could bathe. These rooms had large basins made of stone or clay. Water was poured into them from jars or buckets. Sometimes servants carried the water from the river or a well. The water was warm if possible. Cold baths were not very popular. People liked to feel comfortable. When they bathed, they sat in the basin and used their hands to splash water over their bodies. Some used a piece of cloth to rub their skin. Sand or ash was sometimes mixed with oil to scrub away dirt. This was like an early form of soap. Poorer people did not have basins in their homes. They used large jars or buckets instead, or they went to the river. The Nile was full of water and easy to reach. Many people bathed there in the mornings before starting their day. Children loved to play in the water while their parents washed. They splashed around and swam in the shallow parts. Bathing was often a family event. Everyone took turns, and sometimes neighbors shared water. One person would carry it while another poured it. Bathing was not only about cleaning, it was also relaxing. People enjoyed the feeling of clean skin. It made them feel lighter and cooler in the hot weather. After bathing, they dried off with cloth. Then they put on fresh clothes. Oils were applied to the skin to keep it soft. These oils came from plants and sometimes had nice smells. People liked to feel smooth and clean after a bath. It gave them confidence and made them feel good. Bathing was also done before special events. Weddings, festivals, or visits to temples required a full body wash. It showed respect. People wanted to look their best when going to important places or meeting important people. Being clean was a sign of honor and care. Water was precious in ancient Egypt. It was not wasted. Every drop was used carefully. Jars were reused to pour water over the body. Leftover water was used for cleaning the house or watering plants. Nothing was thrown away unless it had to be. Everyone knew how hard it was to get water, especially during dry seasons. Rich families had special places for storing water. They had large jars buried in the ground to keep it cool. Some had shaded areas near their homes where they could wash in peace. Servants helped bring water and prepare for baths. They also helped clean up afterward. Poorer families had to collect water themselves. They walked to the river or well and filled their jars. It was heavy work, but they did it without complaint. They knew water was important for life and cleanliness. They made sure to share with neighbors and help each other when needed. Bathing was not only for people. Animals were also washed when they got dirty. Horses, donkeys, and even dogs were rinsed with water. Farmers used leftover bathwater to clean their tools or give to thirsty animals. Nothing was wasted. People also used water to clean their homes. Floors were wiped with wet cloths. Curtains were soaked and wrung out. Dishes were washed with sand and water. Keeping the home clean was just as important as keeping the body clean. Bathing was not only about removing dirt, it was also about cooling down. In the hot climate of Egypt, people liked to pour water over their heads and shoulders. It helped them feel refreshed and relaxed. Some even slept better after a cool bath. Over time, bathing became part of daily life. People did not need to be told. They just knew to wash when they could. Whether it was a full bath or just a quick rinse, they found ways to stay clean. Workers who built pyramids or farmed the fields also tried to stay clean. They would rinse their mouths with water after eating and wipe their arms and legs with wet cloths during breaks. Being clean was not just something you did at home. It was something you did wherever you were. Older people also bathed regularly. Even if they could not go to the river, they used whatever water they had. They poured it over their heads and rubbed their arms. Cleanliness was not about having a lot of water. It was about using what you had wisely. Mothers made sure their children were clean before sending them out to play or helping with chores. They wiped their faces, checked their clothes, and made sure their hair was brushed. Clean children were happy children. These habits were passed down through generations. Children watched their parents and learned what to do. Soon, they were doing it on their own without being told. It became a normal part of life. So even though people did not bathe every day, they still tried to stay as clean as they could. Water was used wisely. Time was taken to enjoy the process, and everyone left the bath feeling fresh and ready for the day ahead. They poured water gently. They splashed it softly. They washed their arms. They washed their face. They washed their hands. They dried with cloth. They felt clean. Every morning, the same thing happened again and again. The sun rose. The birds sang. The water flowed. And people, young and old, rich and poor, stood by their basins and bowls and began their day the same way. They washed their hands. They washed their face. They washed their arms. They dried with cloth. They smiled. They breathed deeply. They felt clean. In ancient Egypt, people used oils to keep their skin soft. The air was dry and hot most of the time. Skin could become rough and cracked easily. To protect it, people rubbed oil on their arms, legs, and faces. This helped keep their skin smooth and healthy. Oils were made from plants, nuts, and seeds. The most common ones came from olives, sesame, and castor beans. These oils were thick and smelled nice. People applied them after washing their bodies. Felt good on the skin. It also gave them a shiny look in the sunlight. Some oils were mixed with spices or flowers to make them smell better. Perfume was made this way. People liked to smell good. Both men and women used oils and perfumes every day. Rich people had special jars where they kept their oils. These jars were made of stone or clay. Some were decorated with colors and pictures. Poorer people used small pots or cloth bags. They carried them with them. At work, they would stop to rub oil on their skin, cooled them down. It also stopped their skin from drying out. Children were given oils too. Mothers rubbed them on their arms and legs. Babies were covered in oil after their bath. It made them feel warm and safe. Oil was not just for looks. It was also for protection. It helped block the sun and kept dust from sticking to the skin. Perfumes were made from flowers like lotus and jasmine. These were crushed and mixed with oil. The mix was left to sit for days. Then it was ready to use. People put perfume behind their ears, on their necks, and on their wrists. These places stayed warm. The smell lasted longer. During festivals, people wore small cones of scented wax on top of their heads. As the day went on, the wax melted and spread the scent. Temples used smoke from burning herbs to make the air smell good. Priests were always clean and smelled nice. They believed it made the gods happy. Oils and perfumes were not just for looks. They were also used in medicine. Some oils were thought to help with pain or sickness. People rubbed them on sore muscles or cold chests. Over time, the use of oils became part of daily life. It was something people did without thinking. Just like brushing teeth today, oil was a gift from nature. It helped people feel good, smell good, and stay healthy. Rich families had special places to store their oils. They kept them in cool rooms so they would not melt. Some oils were expensive. They were bought from traders who came from far away. Poorer people made their own. They crushed seeds and pressed out the oil by hand. Took time, but it worked well enough. People used oil before going to bed. They rubbed it on their skin and let it soak in during the night. In the morning, they washed it off with water. Their skin felt soft and fresh. Oil was also used during massage. Family members would rub each other's arms and backs. Felt relaxing and helped with tired muscles. Mothers made sure their children used oil every day. They rubbed it on their arms and legs before sending them out to play. Clean children were happy children. Workers who built pyramids or farmed the land also used oil. They rubbed it on their skin to protect against the sun. It helped keep them cool and stopped their skin from cracking. Older people also used oil regularly. Even if they could not buy fancy ones, they used what they had. They rubbed it on their hands and feet. It helped with dryness and made them feel better. These habits were passed down through generations. Children watched their parents and learned what to do. Soon, they were doing it on their own without being told. It became a normal part of life. So even though oils looked simple, they played an important role in daily life. People used them every day. They rubbed them on their skin. They added them to baths. They mixed them with flowers to make perfume. It was all part of staying clean and feeling good. They rubbed oil gently. They smoothed it softly. They smelled sweet. They felt fresh. They smiled quietly. They breathed deeply. They felt calm. Every morning, the same thing happened again and again. The sun rose. The birds sang. The water flowed. And people, young and old, rich and poor, stood by their basins and bowls and began their day the same way. They poured oil slowly. They rubbed it softly. They dried with cloth. They smiled. They breathed deeply. They felt clean. In ancient Egypt, people took care of their teeth. They did not have toothbrushes like we do today. Instead, they used sticks. These were called chew sticks. One end was bitten until it became soft. Then it was rubbed on the teeth. Some sticks came from trees that had a minty taste. This helped freshen breath. People also used their fingers to rub their gums. Salt or ash was sometimes added to make it clean better. Toothpaste did not exist back then, but people made a kind of powder. It was made from crushed eggshells, bones, and salt. They mixed it with water. Then they rubbed it on their teeth. Some people used honey or spices to make it taste better. Brushing teeth was not done every day by everyone, but many did it once a day, usually in the morning or after eating. Teeth were not as white as today, but people tried to keep them clean. Dentists were rare. If someone had a bad tooth, they visited a healer. He might pull it out with his hands or tools made of metal. Pain was common. Teeth were not strong because of the food. Breads had bits of sand in them. This wore down teeth over time. Gums would bleed. Holes would form. Still, people tried to take care of their mouths. Children learned from adults. They watched them use sticks and powders. They copied them. Bad breath was not liked, so people used herbs to make their breath smell better. Mint and parsley were common. Some chewed on them after eating. Others drank tea made from plants. Keeping the mouth clean was part of being clean overall. People did not smile as much as we do now, but they still wanted to feel fresh. They wanted to talk without bad smells. So oral care was part of daily life. It was not fun, but it was needed. Over time, these habits became normal. People did not question them. They just did them, like washing their hands or putting on clean clothes. Rich families had special places where they kept their cleaning tools. Sticks were stored in small boxes. Powders were kept in jars. Poorer families used whatever they had. They found sticks near their homes. They mixed powder with water in small bowls. Mothers made sure their children cleaned their mouths every day. They gave them sticks to chew. They reminded them to rinse after eating. Clean children were happy children. Workers who built pyramids or farmed the land also tried to stay clean. They rinsed their mouths with water after meals. They used sticks when they could. Being clean was not just something you did at home. It was something you did wherever you were. Older people also cleaned their mouths regularly. Even if they had few teeth left, they still used sticks and powders. Cleanliness was not about having perfect teeth. It was about using what you had wisely. These habits were passed down through generations. Children watched their parents and learned what to do. Soon, they were doing it on their own without being told. It became a normal part of life. So even though toothpaste and brushes were not known, people still found ways to care for their teeth. They used sticks. They used powders. They rinsed with water. And they tried to stay fresh all day long. They brushed gently. They rinsed softly. They spat quietly. They wiped their mouths. They smiled slightly. They breathed deeply. They felt clean. Every morning, the same thing happened again and again. The sun rose. The birds sang. The water flowed. And people, young and old, rich and poor, stood by their basins and bowls and began their day the same way. They washed their hands. They washed their face. They washed their arms. They dried with cloth. They smiled. They breathed deeply. They felt clean. In ancient Egypt, people took care of their hair. They believed that clean hair was a sign of health and respect. Both men and women kept their hair clean and neat. Some wore it long. Others cut it short. Children often had one side shaved and left a single braid on the other. This was a common style for young boys. People washed their hair with water. Some added oil or crushed herbs to make it soft. Combs were made from wood or bone. They were used to untangle hair every morning. Felt nice. It also helped remove dirt and bugs. Lice were common. To stop them, people used oils or crushed herbs. Hats and head wraps were worn to keep hair clean. These were made from cloth. Some were white. Others were dyed with plant colors. Wigs were also used. They were made from human hair or plant fibers. Rich people wore wigs often. They looked neat and did not get dirty. Wigs were cleaned by soaking them in oil. Then they were rinsed in water. After that, they were dried in the sun. People used combs to shape them. Some added perfume to the oil. This made the wig smell nice. Beards were worn by men, especially kings and priests. Fake beards were made from goat hair or wool. They were tied under the chin. Kings wore long, straight beards. Other men had shorter ones. Beards were cleaned with oil and combs. People also shaved their heads and faces. Razors were made from copper. They were not very sharp, but they worked well enough. Shaving was done once a week or more. Kept the skin smooth. It also helped prevent bugs. After shaving, oil was rubbed on the face. This soothed the skin. Hair was trimmed with small knives. People did this at home or went to someone who knew how. Cuts were common, but people did not worry much. They cleaned the cut with water and oil. Rich families had special places to store their combs and oils. Poorer families used whatever they had. They found sticks to comb their hair. They made oil from crushed seeds. Mothers made sure their children's hair was clean before sending them out to play. They wiped their faces, checked their clothes, and made sure their hair was brushed. Clean children were happy children. Workers who built pyramids or farmed the fields also tried to stay clean. They wiped their hair with wet cloths during breaks. They used oil to keep it soft. Being clean was not just something you did at home. It was something you did wherever you were. Older people also cared for their hair. Even if they had little left, they still brushed it every day. Cleanliness was not about having thick hair. It was about using what you had wisely. These habits were passed down through generations. Children watched their parents and learned what to do. Soon, they were doing it on their own without being told. It became a normal part of life. So even though tools were simple, people still found ways to care for their hair. They washed it, they combed it, they oiled it, and they kept it neat all day long. They combed gently, they brushed softly, they oiled slowly, they dried carefully, they smiled slightly, they breathed deeply, they felt clean. Every morning, the same thing happened again and again. The sun rose, the birds sang, the water flowed, and people, young and old, rich and poor, stood by their basins and bowls and began their day the same way. They washed their hands, they washed their face, they washed their arms, they dried with cloth, they smiled, they breathed deeply, they felt clean. In ancient Egypt, people wore clothes made from linen. Linen was light and easy to clean. Most clothing was white because it showed dirt easily and reminded people when it needed washing again. People believed that clean clothes were a sign of respect and health. So they washed their clothes often. Washing was done by hand. People used water from jars or basins. They rubbed the clothes with sand or ash. Sometimes they stepped on them to get dirt out. After washing, clothes were rinsed in clean water. Then they were hung out in the sun to dry. Sunlight helped make them white again. Clothes were folded and stored in boxes or baskets. Some people used sweet-smelling herbs to keep clothes fresh. Bad smells were not liked. People believed that bad smells could bring bad luck or make people sick. So they tried to avoid them. Fresh clothes made people feel better. They looked nicer. They smelled better. And they smiled more because they felt good. Being clean was not only about looking good. It was also about feeling good. Rich families had servants who helped wash clothes. Poorer families did everything themselves. But no matter how much money they had, everyone tried to wear clean clothes. Children learned from their parents how to care for their clothes. They watched as their mothers and fathers soaked fabric in water and rubbed away dirt. They copied what they saw and soon made it part of their own routine. Workers who built pyramids or farmed the fields also tried to stay clean. They changed their clothes when they could. They wiped their arms and legs with wet cloths during breaks. Being clean was not just something you did at home. It was something you did wherever you were. Mothers made sure their children wore clean clothes before sending them out to play or helping with chores. They wiped their faces, checked their clothes, and made sure their hair was brushed. Clean children were happy children. Older people also wore clean clothes. Even if they could not wash every day, they changed when they could. Cleanliness was not about having many clothes. It was about using what you had wisely. These habits were passed down through generations. Children watched their parents and learned what to do. Soon, they were doing it on their own without being told. It became a normal part of life. So even though clothes were simple, people still took care of them. They washed them, they dried them, they folded them neatly, and they wore them with pride. People carried water in jars or pots. These were heavy and took time to fill, but people did not complain. They knew water was important. They shared it with neighbors and made sure everyone had some. Water was not wasted. Leftover water was used for cooking or watering plants. Nothing was thrown away unless it had to be. Everyone knew how hard it was to get water, especially during dry seasons. Clean clothes were worn to temples, festivals, and meetings. Being dirty was not liked in these places. People wanted to look their best. They believed that gods and leaders noticed clean people more than dirty ones. Being clean was not just about looks. It was about respect. When someone visited another home, they were expected to wear clean clothes. A guest who came in with dirty feet or unwashed hands was not welcome. Hosts always offered water so visitors could clean themselves before sitting down. Even animals were washed sometimes. Farmers rinsed donkeys and oxen after long days of work. Horses were cleaned before special events. Dogs were wiped with wet cloths when they got too dusty. Clean animals looked better and smelled better. People also washed after certain activities. After working in the fields, they changed their clothes. After walking a long way, they wiped off dust. After eating, they rinsed their mouths with water. These small acts kept them clean throughout the day. These morning habits were passed down through generations. Children watched their parents and learned what to do. Soon, they were doing it on their own without being told. It became a normal part of life. So every morning, no matter how rich or poor someone was, they started the day the same way. They washed their face, dried off, put on clean clothes, and ate breakfast. It was simple, quiet, and peaceful, and it set the tone for the whole day ahead. They washed gently, they dried softly, they folded neatly, they wore proudly, they smiled slightly, they breathed deeply, they felt clean. Every morning, the same thing happened again and again. The sun rose, the birds sang, the water flowed, and people, young and old, rich and poor, stood by their basins and bowls and began their day the same way. They washed their hands, they washed their face, they washed their arms, they dried with cloth, they smiled, they breathed deeply, they felt clean. In ancient Egypt, people believed that being clean was important. It was not just about looking good. It was also about feeling good. People washed their hands, they washed their face, they washed their arms, they dried with cloth, they smiled, they breathed deeply, they felt clean. Cleanliness was part of daily life. It was something people did without thinking. They woke up early, they poured water gently, they splashed it softly, they rubbed their skin, they dried with cloth, they put on fresh clothes, they ate a simple meal, then they went to work or played with children. Being clean was not only for rich people. Poor families also tried to stay clean. They used whatever tools they had. They washed in jars or buckets. They used leaves to wipe themselves. Cleanliness was not about having the best things. It was about using what you had wisely. Children learned from their parents. They watched them wash every morning. They copied them. They poured water into bowls. They rubbed their faces. They dried off with cloth. Mothers made sure their children were clean before sending them out to play. Clean children were happy children. Workers who built pyramids or farmed the land also tried to stay clean. They rinsed their mouths after eating. They wiped their arms and legs during breaks. They changed clothes when they could. Being clean was not just something you did at home. It was something you did wherever you were. Older people also stayed clean. Even if they could not go to the river, they used whatever water they had. They splashed their faces. They wiped their arms. They changed their clothes when possible. Being old did not mean being dirty. People washed after certain activities. After working in the fields, they rinsed their hands and arms. After walking a long way, they washed their feet. After eating, they rinsed their mouths with water. These small acts kept them clean throughout the day. They washed their hands. They washed their face. They washed their arms. They dried with cloth. They smiled. They breathed deeply. They felt clean. Every morning, the same thing happened again and again. The sun rose. The birds sang. The water flowed. And people, young and old, rich and poor, stood by their basins and bowls and began their day the same way. They washed their hands. They washed their face. They washed their arms. They dried with cloth. They smiled. They breathed deeply. They felt clean. Water was carried in jars or pots. These were heavy and took time to fill. But people did not complain. They knew water was important. They shared it with neighbors and made sure everyone had some. Leftover water was used for cooking or watering plants. Nothing was thrown away unless it had to be. Everyone knew how hard it was to get water, especially during dry seasons. Clothes were washed often. They were soaked in water. They were rubbed with sand. They were rinsed in clean water. They were dried in the sun. They were folded neatly. They were worn with pride. Rich families had servants who helped bring water and prepare things for washing. Poorer families did everything themselves. But no matter how much money they had, everyone tried to be clean. Children learned from their parents how to wash properly. They watched as their mothers and fathers poured water over their hands and rubbed their faces. They copied what they saw and soon made it part of their own routine. People talked about cleanliness in stories and songs. They told children that the gods loved those who were clean. They sang about the coolness of water and the joy of fresh clothes. These ideas stayed with people for their whole lives. Some people believed that being clean made their prayers stronger. If you went to a temple with dirty hands, the gods might not listen. So people made sure to wash carefully before going to worship. Priests were especially careful. They washed many times each day and never touched anything without first cleaning their hands. Cleanliness was also a sign of respect. When someone visited another home, they were expected to wash before entering. A guest who came in with dirty feet or unwashed hands was not welcome. Hosts always offered water so visitors could clean themselves before sitting down. Even animals were washed sometimes. Farmers rinsed donkeys and oxen after long days of work. Horses were cleaned before special events. Dogs were wiped with wet cloths when they got too dusty. Clean animals looked better and smelled better. Mothers made sure their children were clean before sending them out to play or helping with chores. They wiped their faces, checked their clothes, and made sure their hair was brushed. Clean children were happy children. These habits were passed down through generations. Children watched their parents and learned what to do. Soon, they were doing it on their own without being told. It became a normal part of life. So even though life was busy in ancient Egypt, people still found time to take care of themselves. They woke up early, washed their faces, dried off with cloth, and started the day feeling fresh. That is why personal hygiene was such a big part of their lives. They washed their hands. They washed their face. They washed their arms. They dried with cloth. They smiled. They breathed deeply. They felt clean. Every morning, the same thing happened again and again. The sun rose, the birds sang, the water flowed, and people, young and old, rich and poor, stood by their basins and bowls and began their day the same way. They washed their hands. They washed their face. They washed their arms. They dried with cloth. They smiled. They breathed deeply. They felt clean. The sun, a pale disk in the early morning sky, began its slow ascent over the eastern horizon. Its light, still weak and diffused, cast long, indistinct shadows across the military camp. A faint chill lingered in the air, a remnant of the night, gradually yielding to the promise of a new day. Within the orderly rows of tents, the first stirrings of life could be detected. A cough here, a rustle there, the subtle creak of a bed frame as a legionary shifted in his sleep. These were the quiet beginnings of another day in the life of a Roman soldier, a day that would, in many ways, mirror the countless days that had come before it and the countless days that would undoubtedly follow. The rhythm of the camp was predictable, a steady, unchanging beat that governed every aspect of existence. There was a certain comfort in this predictability, a sense of order in a world that could often be chaotic and unpredictable. Each man knew his place, his duties, and the expectations placed upon him. There was little room for deviation, little need for improvisation. The routine was a well-worn path, a familiar journey that required little thought or effort. Simply was. And so, as the light grew stronger and the chill receded, the camp slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to awaken. The sounds became a little louder, the movements a little more deliberate. The day, like all days, had begun. The first sounds to truly break the silence were the distant calls of birds, a chirping that seemed to grow in intensity as the sky lightened. Soon after, the more familiar sounds of the camp began to emerge. The clatter of metal, the low murmur of voices, the rhythmic thud of feet on packed earth. These were the sounds of men preparing for another day of duty, a symphony of mundane activities that marked the transition from sleep to wakefulness. Legionaries, one by one, began to emerge from their tents, their faces still creased with sleep, their movements slow and deliberate. There was no rush, no urgency. The morning routine was a ritual, a series of prescribed actions that had been performed countless times before. Each man knew what was expected of him, and he performed his tasks with a quiet efficiency born of long practice. They would stretch, perhaps yawn, and then begin the simple process of preparing themselves for the day ahead. This involved adjusting their tunics, ensuring their sandals were properly secured, and generally making themselves presentable for the rigors of military life. The air, once still, now carried the faint scent of wood smoke, as small fires were kindled for the morning meal. The smoke rose in thin, lazy columns, dissipating quickly into the brightening sky. It was a smell that was intimately associated with camp life, a constant reminder of the communal existence shared by all legionaries. The fires, small and controlled, provided a modest warmth, a welcome comfort in the lingering morning chill. Around these fires, small groups of men would gather, their conversations hushed and understated. There was little need for animated discussion. The topics of conversation were as predictable as the routine itself. The weather, the quality of the rations, the upcoming duties, these were the simple subjects that occupied their minds. There was a quiet camaraderie among them, a shared understanding that transcended the need for elaborate words. They were bound by their common purpose, their shared experiences, and the unspoken knowledge that they were all part of something larger than themselves. The morning meal itself was a simple affair. Hardtack, perhaps some dried fruit, and a measure of pasca, a sour wine mixed with water. It was sustenance, nothing more, designed to provide the necessary energy for the day's tasks without offering any undue pleasure. The act of eating was quick and efficient, a necessary interlude before the serious business of the day began. There was no lingering over the meal, no savoring of flavors. It was a functional activity, performed with a quiet resignation. The silence that often accompanied these meals was not one of discomfort, but rather one of quiet contemplation. Each man was lost in his own thoughts, preparing himself mentally for the hours that lay ahead. The sun continued its ascent, its rays now beginning to penetrate the camp with greater intensity. The shadows shortened, and the air grew warmer. The sounds of the camp became more pronounced, a steady hum of activity that indicated the full awakening of the Legion. The time for quiet reflection was drawing to a close. The time for duty was at hand. The morning, in its slow and deliberate unfolding, had reached its inevitable conclusion. The day, in all its monotonous glory, was ready to begin. As the last crumbs of the morning meal were brushed away, the legionaries began to prepare for the day's first official duties. This often involved a general assembly, a gathering of the men in a designated area of the camp. The purpose of this assembly was not always dramatic. More often than not, it was simply to receive the day's orders, to be reminded of the schedule, and to ensure that all men were present and accounted for. The process of forming up was itself a testament to the Legion's discipline. Rows would form with precision, each man taking his accustomed place, his eyes fixed forward, his posture rigid. There was no chatter, no fidgeting. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional command from a centurion, delivered in a clear, measured tone. These commands were not shouted, but rather spoken with an authority that left no room for misinterpretation. The men understood and they obeyed. The sun, now higher in the sky, cast a brighter, more direct light upon the assembled ranks. The dust, disturbed by the movement of so many feet, began to rise in a fine haze, catching the sunlight and creating a shimmering, almost ethereal effect. It was a common sight, one that was repeated day after day, week after week, year after year. The faces of the legionaries, though varied in their individual features, shared a common expression of quiet endurance. There was no excitement, no anticipation. There was only the steady, unwavering commitment to the task at hand. The orders, when they came, were typically brief and to the point. They might concern the day's training exercises, the allocation of duties, or perhaps a general reminder of camp regulations. There was little room for discussion or debate. The orders were given, and they were to be carried out. The simplicity of these directives was a reflection of the Legion's operational philosophy: efficiency, order, and unwavering obedience. After the assembly, the men would disperse, each heading to his assigned task. For some, it would be a day of drills on the training ground, practicing formations, weapon handling, and marching. For others, it might involve maintenance duties within the camp, repairing equipment, cleaning latrines, or tending to the camp's infrastructure. Still, others might be assigned to guard duty, manning the watchtowers or patrolling the perimeter. Each task, no matter how seemingly insignificant, contributed to the overall functioning of the Legion. There was a sense of interconnectedness, a recognition that every man's effort, however small, played a vital role in the larger machine. The day unfolded with a predictable rhythm, a series of tasks performed with methodical precision. The sun continued its journey across the sky, marking the passage of time with its steady, unwavering progress. The sounds of the camp, once a gentle hum, now became a more pronounced symphony of activity. The clang of hammers, the shouts of instructors, the rhythmic pounding of feet. These were the sounds of a legion at work, a testament to its unwavering dedication to duty. The hours passed, each one blending seamlessly into the next, a continuous flow of routine and repetition. There was little to distinguish one moment from another, save for the subtle shifts in light and shadow as the sun moved overhead. The legionaries, immersed in their tasks, moved with a quiet efficiency, their movements honed by countless hours of practice. Their minds, perhaps, drifted to other things, to distant homes or forgotten dreams, but their bodies remained firmly rooted in the present, performing the duties that defined their existence. The day, in its steady, unhurried progression, continued its march towards evening, another chapter in the endless saga of the Roman legionary's life. The morning sun, now fully risen, cast its golden light across the training grounds. The air, still cool from the night, was beginning to warm, promising a day of exertion. Legionaries, having completed their morning meal and assembly, began to gather in the designated areas, their movements precise and practiced. This was the time for training, a fundamental aspect of their daily lives, as ingrained as eating or sleeping. The drills were not new. They were repetitions of movements and formations learned countless times before. Yet, each repetition was treated with the same seriousness, the same unwavering focus. There was no room for complacency, no allowance for error. Discipline was paramount, a constant, unyielding force that shaped every action, every thought. The centurions, their voices clear and resonant, issued commands that echoed across the field. These commands were simple, direct, and unambiguous. They spoke of forward movements, of turning, of raising shields, of thrusting spears. Each command was followed by a synchronized response, a collective movement of bodies and equipment that spoke of hours, days, weeks, and years of relentless practice. The rhythmic thud of feet on the packed earth, the clang of wooden swords against shields, the grunts of effort, these were the sounds of the training ground, a monotonous symphony of physical exertion. The dust, disturbed by the constant movement, rose in a fine cloud, coating everything in a thin, gritty layer. It settled on tunics, on skin, on equipment, a constant reminder of the physical demands of their profession. Sweat beaded on foreheads, trickled down temples, and stained the fabric of their clothing. It was a natural consequence of their efforts, a visible manifestation of their dedication. There was no complaint, no murmur of discontent. The work was hard, but it was necessary. It was the foundation upon which their lives and the lives of the empire were built. The sun climbed higher, its warmth intensifying, but the pace of the training did not slacken. The legionaries moved with a steady, unhurried rhythm, their movements efficient and economical. There was no wasted energy, no superfluous motion. Every action served a purpose, Every movement contributed to the overall effectiveness of the unit. The training was not about individual prowess, but about collective strength, about the seamless integration of each man into the larger whole. The individual was subsumed by the legion, his identity merged with that of his comrades. This was the essence of Roman military might, a force forged not just from steel and strategy, but from an unyielding commitment to discipline and unity. The hours passed, marked only by the changing position of the sun and the increasing weariness in their limbs. Yet, they continued, driven by an internal fortitude that transcended mere physical discomfort. The training was a test, a constant reaffirmation of their readiness, their resilience, and their unwavering loyalty. It was a silent promise made to themselves and to the empire that they would always be prepared, always be ready, always be capable. And so, the day continued, a relentless cycle of effort and repetition, a testament to the enduring spirit of the Roman legionary. The drills continued, each one flowing seamlessly into the next, a continuous tapestry of movement and command. The legionaries practiced their shield wall, a formidable defensive formation that had proven its worth on countless battlefields. They moved as one, shields interlocking, creating an impenetrable barrier against any foe. The weight of the shield, the constant pressure against their arm, the heat radiating from their bodies, these were the sensations that accompanied the drill. There was no thought of discomfort, only the unwavering focus on maintaining the integrity of the line. The centurions walked among them, their eyes sharp, their presence a constant reminder of the standards that were expected. A slight misalignment, a momentary lapse in concentration, and a sharp word would cut through the air, correcting the error with swift precision. There was no anger in their voices, only a calm, unwavering authority. They were sculptors of men, shaping raw recruits into hardened warriors, honing their skills to a razor-backslash edge. The sun beat down, its rays growing more intense with each passing hour. The dust, churned by hundreds of feet, hung in the air, a hazy veil that softened the edges of the camp. The rhythmic sounds of training continued, a hypnotic beat that filled the air. The clatter of pila, the short throwing spears, as they were hurled at imaginary enemies, the dull thud of gladii, the short swords, as they struck practiced dummies. Each sound was a testament to the dedication of the men, to their tireless pursuit of perfection. The training was not just about physical prowess. It was about mental fortitude, about the ability to endure, to persevere, to push past the limits of what seemed possible. It was about building a collective will, a shared determination that would hold firm in the face of adversity. The legionaries understood this. They embraced the hardship, knowing that it was through such trials that they became stronger, more resilient, more capable. The midday sun reached its zenith, casting short, sharp shadows. A brief respite was granted, a moment to catch their breath, to wipe the sweat from their brows, to take a quick drink of water. There was little conversation during these breaks. The men were too focused on their recovery, on preparing themselves for the next phase of training. The silence was a welcome relief, a brief interlude in the relentless rhythm of the day. Then, with a sharp command, the drills would resume, the familiar sounds and movements beginning anew. The afternoon brought more of the same, a continuation of the morning-s efforts. The focus shifted to marching, to covering long distances with heavy packs, to maintaining formation over uneven terrain. This was the essence of legionary movement, the ability to transport a large, disciplined force across vast distances, arriving at their destination ready for battle. The rhythmic crunch of their sandals on the ground, the steady swing of their arms, the collective breathing of hundreds of men, these were the sounds of a legion on the move. The landscape blurred, a monotonous procession of fields, hills, and occasional streams. There was little to see, little to distract from the task at hand. Their gaze was fixed forward, their minds focused on the next step, the next mile. The discipline was absolute, a silent agreement among them to endure, to push forward, no matter the fatigue, no matter the discomfort. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows once more. The air began to cool, a welcome change after the heat of the day. The training, though still rigorous, began to wind down. The final drills were performed with the same precision as the first, a testament to their unwavering commitment. As the light faded, the legionaries returned to camp, their bodies weary, their minds calm. Another day of training was complete, another step taken on the long, familiar path of a Roman legionary. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the camp. The air, once filled with the sounds of training, was now quieter, a low hum of activity replacing the earlier clamor. For some legionaries, the day's exertions were far from over. The duty of standing guard, a constant and unwavering responsibility, now fell upon them. This was a task that demanded vigilance, a quiet endurance that often went unnoticed, yet was crucial to the safety and security of the entire legion. The watchtower, a simple wooden structure, stood tall against the fading light. From its elevated position, the legionary on duty had a panoramic view of the surrounding landscape. Fields stretched out in every direction, their colors muted by the approaching twilight. The distant treeline, a dark, indistinct mass, offered little in the way of visual interest. The sky, a vast expanse of deepening blue, slowly began to reveal the first faint stars. The silence was profound, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant chirping of crickets, and the occasional hoot of an owl. There was little to see, little to hear, little to do but watch. The hours passed with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Each minute seemed to stretch into an eternity, each hour a small lifetime. The legionary shifted his weight, adjusted his grip on his spear, and scanned the horizon once more. His eyes, though weary, remained sharp, constantly searching for any sign of movement, any hint of an anomaly. The mind, left to its own devices, could wander, drifting to distant memories, to loved ones far away, to dreams of a life beyond the confines of the camp. But always the discipline would pull it back, reminding him of his duty, of the unwavering vigilance that was required. The night deepened, and the stars, once faint, now blazed with a cold, distant brilliance. The moon, a pale crescent, cast a soft, ethereal glow upon the landscape. The camp below, once a hive of activity, was now a collection of dark, silent shapes, its inhabitants lost in the depths of sleep. Only the flickering light of the watch fires and the occasional movement of a patrolling sentry offered any indication of life. The air grew colder, and a thin mist began to rise from the low-lying areas, clinging to the ground like a ghostly shroud. The legionary pulled his cloak tighter, seeking what little warmth it could offer. The cold was a constant companion, a subtle discomfort that permeated every aspect of his being. Yet he endured, his resolve unwavering. The duty was paramount, a sacred trust that could not be broken. The world outside the camp was a place of uncertainty, of potential danger. It was his responsibility to stand between that world and the sleeping legion, to be the eyes and ears that protected them from harm. And so he watched and waited and endured, a silent sentinel against the encroaching darkness. The hours of the night passed with a deliberate slowness, each one marked by the changing position of the stars and the deepening chill in the air. The legionary on watch maintained his silent vigil, his senses heightened, his attention unwavering. The sounds of the camp were minimal now, a symphony of soft snores, the occasional rustle of straw, and the gentle creak of tent poles in the breeze. These were the sounds of a sleeping army, a testament to the peace and security that his watch, and the watches of countless others, provided. His gaze swept across the perimeter, noting the faint outlines of the palisade, the subtle undulations of the ditch beyond. Every shadow held the potential for movement, every whisper of wind a possible harbinger of danger. Yet, for the most part, the night remained uneventful, a long stretch of quiet observation. The monotony was a test in itself, a challenge to his focus and endurance. It was easy for the mind to drift, to succumb to the lure of sleep, but the consequences of such a lapse were too dire to contemplate. He would shift his weight, stamp his feet to ward off the cold, and occasionally hum a low, tuneless melody to himself, just enough to keep his thoughts from wandering too far. The moon, now higher in the sky, cast a brighter, more defined light, illuminating the camp in shades of silver and gray. The outlines of the tents, once indistinct, now stood out with a stark clarity. The ground, still damp from the evening mist, shimmered faintly under the lunar glow. It was a beautiful yet desolate scene, a stark reminder of the isolation that often accompanied the duty of a sentry. He was alone, yet he was part of something vast and powerful, a small cog in a massive machine designed for order and defense. The thought brought a strange sense of comfort, a quiet reassurance in the face of the overwhelming stillness. The occasional sound of a fellow sentry, a cough or a soft movement from a distant watchtower, served as a subtle reminder that he was not entirely alone. They were all connected, bound by the shared responsibility of their watch, a silent network of vigilance that encompassed the entire camp. The concept of time in this quiet solitude became fluid, almost meaningless. It was not measured by the ticking of a clock, but by the slow progression of the stars, by the gradual shift in the quality of the light, by the subtle changes in the temperature of the air. He was simply existing in the moment, a living embodiment of watchfulness. The cold continued to seep into his bones, a persistent ache that he had long since learned to ignore. His thoughts were simple, focused on the immediate present. The feel of the spear in his hand, the texture of the ground beneath his feet, the vast, silent expanse of the night sky above him. There was a certain peace in this simplicity, a freedom from the complexities of the day. The night was a time for quiet reflection, for a deeper connection with the fundamental realities of his existence. He was a soldier, and this was his duty. And so he stood, a silent guardian against the encroaching darkness, waiting for the first faint blush of dawn to appear on the eastern horizon, signaling the end of his watch and the beginning of another day for the Legion. The sun, now high in the sky, cast a harsh, unwavering light upon the camp. The morning's training drills had concluded, and for many legionaries, the next phase of their day involved a different kind of exertion: construction and maintenance. The Roman legion was not merely a fighting force. It was also a formidable engineering corps, capable of building roads, bridges, and fortifications with remarkable speed and efficiency. This was a constant, ongoing process, a relentless battle against the elements and the wear and tear of daily life. The air was filled with the sounds of hammers striking wood, the rhythmic scrape of shovels against earth, and the occasional grunt of effort as heavy stones were moved into place. Dust, a perpetual companion in the camp, rose in clouds, coating everything in a fine, gritty layer. It settled on their hair, their faces, their clothing, a constant reminder of the physical nature of their work. The tasks were varied, but all shared a common thread. They were repetitive, demanding, and essential. Some legionaries were engaged in the construction of new defensive structures, perhaps extending the palisade or deepening the ditch that surrounded the camp. Others were repairing existing buildings, patching roofs, mending fences, or shoring up walls that had been weakened by time or weather. Still others were involved in the maintenance of the camp's infrastructure, clearing drainage ditches, repairing pathways, or ensuring the proper functioning of the water supply. There was no room for idleness, no opportunity for a moment's rest. Every man had a role to play, every hand was needed. The centurions, ever vigilant, moved among them, their eyes scanning for any sign of inefficiency or slackness. Their presence was a constant spur, a silent reminder of the standards that were expected. A misplaced timber, a poorly dug trench, a loose nail, these were not minor errors, but potential weaknesses that could compromise the safety and effectiveness of the entire camp. The work was not glamorous, nor was it exciting. It was a monotonous grind, a continuous cycle of physical labor that stretched from dawn until dusk. Yet, there was a certain satisfaction in it, a quiet pride in the knowledge that they were contributing to the strength and security of the Legion. Each nail hammered, each stone laid, each shovelful of earth moved. These were small acts, but together, they built something enduring, something that would protect them and their comrades. The sun beat down, its heat relentless, But the work continued, unceasing. Sweat streamed down their faces, stinging their eyes, but they did not falter. Their muscles ached, their backs protested, but they pushed through the discomfort, driven by a sense of duty and a shared commitment to the legion. The Roman legionary was not just a warrior. He was also a builder, a craftsman, a tireless worker who understood that the strength of the empire rested not just on its military might, but also on its ability to construct and maintain the infrastructure that supported its vast reach. And so, the day unfolded, a relentless cycle of labor and construction, a testament to the enduring spirit of the Roman legionary. The construction work continued with a steady, unhurried pace. The legionaries moved with a practiced efficiency, each man knowing his role, each movement contributing to the overall progress. There was little conversation, only the sounds of their labor. The rhythmic thud of mallets on wooden stakes, the scrape of trowels against mortar, the creak of ropes as heavy loads were hoisted. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut timber and damp earth, a familiar aroma that permeated every corner of the camp. The tasks were often repetitive, requiring little thought beyond the immediate action. A legionary might spend hours digging a trench, his shovel rising and falling with monotonous regularity. Another might be tasked with carrying stones, his shoulders aching under the weight, his steps heavy and deliberate. Yet another might be shaping timbers, his axe biting into the wood with a dull, satisfying thud. The work was physically demanding, a constant test of endurance and strength. Muscles burned, sweat stung their eyes, and their hands grew calloused and rough. But there was no complaint, no murmur of discontent. This was their duty, a fundamental aspect of their lives as soldiers. They understood that the strength of the camp, its ability to withstand attack, depended on the quality of their work. Every joint, every beam, every stone was a testament to their dedication. The sun continued its relentless journey across the sky, its heat intensifying with each passing hour. The dust, disturbed by their constant movement, rose in a fine, powdery cloud, settling on their skin and clothing. It was a constant companion, a gritty reminder of the physical nature of their existence. The water carriers moved among them, offering dippers of cool water, a brief respite from the heat and the dust. The water, though simple, was a welcome relief, a momentary quenching of the thirst that seemed to be a permanent state. The afternoon brought no change in the pace of work. The construction continued, unceasing, a testament to the legionaries' unwavering commitment. The walls of the new barracks slowly rose, brick by brick, stone by stone. The palisade grew taller, its sharpened stakes pointing defiantly towards the sky. The ditches deepened, their sides steep and unforgiving. Each completed section was a small victory, a tangible sign of their progress. The work was not about speed, but about precision and durability. They built to last, to withstand the ravages of time and the assaults of any enemy. The tools they used were simple, yet effective. Shovels, picks, axes, hammers, and saws. These were the extensions of their hands, the instruments through which they shaped the world around them. The skills they possessed were not learned overnight. They were the culmination of years of practice, passed down from one generation of legionaries to the next. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the camp once more. The air began to cool, offering a slight reprieve from the day's heat. Yet, the work continued, driven by the knowledge that there was still much to be done before nightfall. The sounds of construction would gradually fade as the light diminished, replaced by the softer sounds of the evening routine. But for now, the rhythmic sounds of building continued, a steady, unyielding testament to the tireless efforts of the Roman legionary. As the day drew to a close, the legionaries, though tired, felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The new structures stood firm, the repairs were complete, and the camp was a little more secure than it had been that morning. This was the essence of their daily lives, a continuous cycle of labor, discipline, and contribution to the greater good of the legion. The setting sun cast long, golden shadows across the newly built walls, a silent testament to their unwavering dedication. The air, now cooler, carried the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, a comforting aroma that signaled the end of another long day. The sounds of the camp began to change, the clamor of construction replaced by the softer murmurs of evening routines. Soon, they would gather for their evening meal, a simple but well-earned reward for their tireless efforts. The day had been long, filled with monotonous tasks and physical exertion, but it had also been productive. Each legionary, in his own way, had contributed to the strength and resilience of the Roman military machine. And as darkness finally enveloped the camp, a quiet peace settled over the weary soldiers, a peace earned through hard work and unwavering commitment. The midday sun hung high above the Roman camp, casting short, sharp shadows. The intense heat of the afternoon had settled over everything, making even the simplest movements feel like a burden. For the legionaries, this was a time for a brief, much-needed respite from the relentless demands of their daily duties. It was the time for the midday meal, a moment of quiet consumption and temporary relief. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and cooking food, carried the low murmur of voices from various parts of the camp. There was no boisterous laughter or loud conversation, just a subdued hum of activity as men gathered their rations and found a spot to sit. The meal itself was simple as always, a portion of hardtack, perhaps some dried meat or cheese, and a measure of diluted wine or water. It was sustenance, not a feast, designed to provide the necessary energy for the remainder of the day's tasks without offering any unnecessary indulgence. Each legionary ate in a methodical, unhurried manner. There was no rush, no competition for food. Every bite was chewed thoroughly, every sip savored, not for its taste, but for the nourishment it provided. The act of eating was a routine, a necessary function, performed with a quiet efficiency that reflected the overall discipline of their lives. Some men sat alone, their gaze fixed on some distant, unseen point, their thoughts perhaps wandering to places far from the dusty confines of the camp. Others sat in small groups, their conversations low and infrequent, punctuated by long silences. There was a shared understanding among them, a silent camaraderie born of shared hardship and common purpose. They did not need many words to communicate. A glance, a nod, a shared sigh was often enough. The sounds of eating were subtle. The gentle crunch of hard bread, the soft slurping of water, the occasional clink of a metal cup against a wooden surface. These were the sounds of men replenishing their bodies, preparing for the next phase of their day. The sun continued its slow, deliberate arc across the sky, its heat unwavering. The shadows, which had been short at midday, began to lengthen imperceptibly, a subtle indication of the passage of time. The dust, disturbed by their movements, rose in faint wisps, settling back down with a quiet sigh. The flies, ever present, buzzed lazily in the heat, a constant, low drone that blended into the background noise of the camp. The meal was not a time for recreation, but for necessary refueling. There were no games, no elaborate entertainments. The brief period of rest was dedicated solely to the consumption of food and the conservation of energy. It was a practical interlude, a functional pause in the relentless rhythm of their lives. As the last morsels were consumed and the last drops of liquid swallowed, a quiet sense of readiness began to settle over the camp. The brief respite was drawing to a close. The time for rest was over, and the time for duty was about to begin once more. The legionaries would slowly rise, gather their meager belongings, and prepare themselves for the afternoon's tasks. The cycle continued, an endless repetition of work, rest, and preparation, each segment flowing seamlessly into the next. The midday meal, though brief and unremarkable, was a vital component of this cycle, a small but essential pause that allowed the Roman legionary to endure the monotonous demands of his daily existence. And so, the quiet hum of the camp would gradually give way to the more purposeful sounds of renewed activity, as the legionaries returned to their duties, their bodies nourished, their minds refreshed, ready to face the unchanging rhythm of their lives. After the meal, the brief period of rest continued, though it was not a time for idleness. For some, it was an opportunity to attend to small personal tasks. A legionary might carefully inspect his armor, checking for any signs of wear or damage, polishing a dull spot on his breastplate, or tightening a loose strap on his greaves. Another might sharpen his sword, the rhythmic rasp of stone against metal a familiar and comforting sound. These were not duties assigned by a centurion, but rather personal responsibilities, a quiet dedication to maintaining the tools of their trade. The condition of their equipment was a matter of pride, a reflection of their discipline and readiness. A well-maintained sword was a reliable companion in battle, a polished shield a testament to their vigilance. The air, though still warm, seemed to carry a different quality now, a subtle shift from the intensity of midday. The shadows continued to lengthen, stretching across the dusty ground, offering small patches of shade that were eagerly sought out. The sounds of the camp remained subdued, a gentle murmur of activity that never quite ceased. The distant clatter of a blacksmith at his forge, the faint shouts of men engaged in some minor task, the soft rustle of straw as a legionary shifted his position. These were the background noises of their existence, a constant reminder of the collective life they shared. Some legionaries chose to spend their brief respite in quiet contemplation. They might sit with their backs against a tent pole, their eyes closed, their minds drifting. Perhaps they revisited memories of home, of family, of a life that seemed distant and almost unreal in the harsh reality of the camp. Or perhaps they simply rested, allowing their bodies to recover from the morning's exertions and prepare for the afternoon's demands. There was no pressure to engage in conversation, no expectation of entertainment. The silence was a welcome companion, a rare luxury in a life filled with constant noise and activity. The sun, though still powerful, had begun its slow descent towards the western horizon. Its light, once harsh and direct, softened, casting a warmer, more golden hue over the camp. The dust, which had been so prominent earlier, seemed to settle, creating a hazy, almost dreamlike atmosphere. The flies, though still present, seemed less insistent, their buzzing a less intrusive sound. The brief period of rest was drawing to a close. The subtle signals were everywhere. The increasing movement of men, the gathering of tools, the quiet preparations for the next phase of their duties. The rhythm of the camp was about to shift once more, from the quiet contemplation of rest to the purposeful activity of work. The legionaries, their bodies somewhat refreshed, their minds somewhat cleared, would soon rise and return to their assigned tasks. The afternoon would bring more of the same, more labor, more discipline, more of the monotonous routine that defined their lives. But for now, in these fleeting moments of quiet respite, they found a brief escape, a temporary reprieve from the relentless demands of their existence. It was a small comfort, but a vital one, allowing them to endure the unchanging rhythm of their days. And as the sun continued its slow journey towards the horizon, the camp would gradually awaken once more, its inhabitants ready to resume their duties, their lives a continuous cycle of effort and endurance. As the sun began its final descent, casting long, fading shadows across the Roman camp, a subtle shift in the atmosphere became apparent. The clamor of the day's activities gradually subsided, replaced by a more subdued hum as legionaries began to prepare for the evening rituals. This was a time for winding down, for attending to personal needs, and for the collective transition from the demands of labor to the quiet anticipation of rest. The air, once thick with dust and the scent of exertion, now carried the faint aroma of cooking fires and damp earth. The sounds of the camp softened, the distant clatter of mess kits, the low murmur of voices, the occasional whinny of a horse from the stables. These were the familiar sounds of an army settling down for the night, a comforting symphony of domesticity that offered a brief respite from the rigors of military life. Legionaries moved with a practiced efficiency, their movements unhurried but purposeful. Some gathered their meager belongings, carefully folding their cloaks or arranging their personal effects within their tents. Others attended to their weapons and armor, giving them a final wipe-down or checking for any damage incurred during the day. This meticulous attention to detail was not merely a matter of discipline. It was a fundamental aspect of their survival. A well-maintained sword was a reliable companion, a clean shield a testament to their readiness. The water buckets, which had been constantly refilled throughout the day, were now used for personal ablutions. A quick splash of cool water on the face and hands, a brief rinse of the mouth. These were simple acts, yet they offered a sense of cleanliness and refreshment after a long day of toil. The dust and grime of the camp were temporarily washed away, leaving a fleeting sensation of renewal. The evening meal, though simple, was a focal point of this transition. Legionaries gathered in their cantaburnia, sharing their rations in a quiet camaraderie. The conversation was minimal, often limited to practical matters or brief observations about the day. There was no need for elaborate discussions. Their shared experiences spoke volumes. The act of eating together, even in silence, reinforced the bonds of brotherhood that were essential to their cohesion as a fighting force. As darkness deepened, the flickering light of the oil lamps and campfires cast dancing shadows on the tent walls. The sounds of activity gradually diminished, replaced by the quiet stillness of a sleeping army. Only the occasional call of a sentry or the distant hoot of an owl would break the silence. The day, filled with monotonous labor and unwavering discipline, had come to an end. The Roman legionary, a master of both warfare and construction, would now rest, his body weary but his mind at peace, knowing that he had contributed to the enduring strength and security of the empire. And with the rising sun, the cycle would begin anew, a relentless rhythm of duty, labor, and quiet endurance. The preparation for sleep was a ritual in itself, a series of deliberate actions designed to ensure maximum rest and readiness for the following day. Each legionary would find his designated spot within the tent, often a small, cramped space shared with several comrades. The straw mattress, though rough, offered a familiar comfort, a temporary haven from the hard ground. The wool blanket, though thin, provided a measure of warmth against the encroaching night chill. There was a quiet order to their movements, a silent understanding of personal space within the communal living arrangements. The sounds of breathing, soft and rhythmic, filled the tent, a testament to the exhaustion of bodies pushed to their limits. The occasional cough or sigh would punctuate the stillness, but for the most part, the night was a time for deep, restorative sleep. The legionary would lie on his back, his hands clasped over his chest, his eyes closed. His thoughts, which had been so active during the day, would gradually slow, drifting into a state of quiet contemplation. He might reflect on the day's events, the tasks accomplished, the challenges overcome. Or perhaps his mind would wander to more personal matters, to memories of home, of family, of a life far removed from the constant demands of military service. These were fleeting thoughts, however, quickly replaced by the growing weight of sleep. The body, weary from physical exertion, craved rest, and the mind, though disciplined, readily surrendered to its demands. The darkness outside the tent was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of distant watch fires. The sounds of the camp were muted, a low hum that blended into the background noise of the night. The air grew colder, and a thin mist began to rise from the low-lying areas, clinging to the ground like a ghostly shroud. But within the tent, there was a sense of warmth and security, a shared sanctuary from the elements and the potential dangers of the outside world. The legionary would drift into a deep, dreamless sleep, his body recovering, his mind at peace. The hours of the night would pass quickly, marked only by the changing of the guard and the subtle shift in the quality of the air. And as the first faint blush of dawn began to appear on the eastern horizon, he would awaken, refreshed and ready to face another day of duty, another cycle of labor and discipline. The evening rituals, though simple, were essential to the well-being of the Roman legionary, providing a necessary transition from the demands of the day to the restorative power of sleep, ensuring that he was always prepared for the relentless rhythm of his life in the service of the empire. The quiet of the night was a profound thing, a blanket that settled over the camp, muffling the sounds of the world beyond. Only the most essential noises remained: the soft rustle of leaves in the distant trees, the gentle sigh of the wind, the occasional hoot of an owl. These were the sounds of nature, indifferent to the human presence, yet they provided a soothing backdrop to the legionary's slumber. Each man, in his own way, sought to find comfort in the familiar routines, in the knowledge that his comrades were close by, sharing the same quiet space. The shared vulnerability of sleep created a silent bond, a collective trust that transcended the hierarchies of rank and duty. For a few precious hours, they were simply men, resting, recovering, preparing for the demands of another day. The darkness was a welcome embrace, a temporary escape from the harsh realities of their existence. It was a time for the body to heal, for the mind to clear, for the spirit to find a brief moment of peace. And as the night deepened, the camp became a single, breathing entity, a vast collection of sleeping bodies, each one a testament to the enduring strength and resilience of the Roman legion. The life of a Roman legionary was not confined to the static boundaries of a fortified camp. Often, their duties called them to move, to march across vast distances, to establish temporary encampments in unfamiliar territories. This was the life on the march, a continuous cycle of movement, adaptation, and the relentless pursuit of order in a constantly changing landscape. The morning began early, long before the first hint of dawn. The camp, which had been a silent collection of tents just hours before, now buzzed with a low, purposeful energy. Legionaries, roused from their sleep, quickly dismantled their tents, rolled their blankets, and prepared their meager belongings for the day's journey. There was a quiet efficiency to their movements, a practiced rhythm born of countless repetitions. Each man knew his role, each task was performed with a minimum of fuss. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke from the last embers of the campfires. The sounds were muted, the soft clatter of equipment, the low murmur of voices, the rhythmic crunch of boots on the gravelly ground. As the first faint light appeared on the eastern horizon, the legionaries formed up, their ranks precise and orderly. The centurions, their voices low but firm, gave the commands, and the vast column began to move. The initial pace was slow, a deliberate rhythm designed to conserve energy for the long hours ahead. Each step was measured, each stride consistent. The ground beneath their feet varied. Sometimes it was a well-worn road, smooth and easy to traverse. At other times it was rough, uneven terrain, demanding constant attention and careful footing. The landscape changed with each passing mile. Sometimes they marched through dense forests, the trees towering above them, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. At other times, they crossed open plains, the vast expanse stretching out before them, seemingly endless. Rivers were forded, hills were climbed, and valleys were descended, each geographical feature presenting its own unique challenges. The sounds of the march were monotonous. The rhythmic tramp of thousands of boots, the creak of leather, the occasional jingle of armor. Conversation was minimal, limited to brief exchanges or necessary commands. Each legionary was lost in his own thoughts, his mind focused on the immediate task of putting one foot in front of the other. The sun, as it rose higher in the sky, brought with it a relentless heat. Sweat streamed down their faces, stinging their eyes, but they did not falter. Their bodies ached, their muscles protested, but they pushed through the discomfort, driven by a sense of duty and the unwavering discipline that was ingrained in every Roman soldier. The dust, stirred up by their passage, rose in clouds, coating everything in a fine, gritty layer. It settled on their hair, their faces, their clothing, a constant reminder of the physical nature of their journey. Brief halts were taken, usually at midday, to allow for a quick meal and a moment of rest. These were not long pauses, just enough time to replenish their energy before resuming the march. The water, though often warm and dusty, was a welcome relief, a momentary quenching of the thirst that seemed to be a permanent state. As the afternoon wore on, the pace remained consistent. The destination, though often distant, was always in their minds. They were a moving force, a disciplined machine, advancing steadily towards their objective. The landscape continued to unfold before them, a continuous panorama of changing scenery, yet the rhythm of their march remained constant, an unchanging beat in a world of flux. The day ended as it began, with the establishment of a temporary camp. The process was familiar, a well-rehearsed ritual. Tents were erected, a palisade was constructed, and a ditch was dug, all with remarkable speed and efficiency. Within hours, a new, temporary home had been created, a safe haven for the weary legionaries. The evening meal was simple, consumed in quiet exhaustion. The sounds of the camp were subdued, a low hum of activity as men prepared for sleep. The day had been long, filled with monotonous movement and unwavering discipline, but it had also been productive. Each legionary, in his own way, had contributed to the strength and resilience of the Roman military machine. And as darkness finally enveloped the camp, a quiet peace settled over the weary soldiers, a peace earned through hard work and unwavering commitment. The life on the march was a continuous cycle of movement and temporary settlement, a relentless rhythm that ensured the smooth functioning of the vast Roman military machine. And in that rhythm, there was a strange, quiet beauty, a profound sense of purpose that transcended the mundane details of daily existence. As the last embers of the campfires faded into the deepening night, a profound stillness settled over the Roman encampment. The sounds of the day, the clatter of tools, the murmur of voices, the rhythmic tramp of marching feet, had all receded, replaced by a quiet that was almost absolute. This was the domain of the night, a time for rest, for reflection, and for the silent vigil of the centuries. The air grew cooler, carrying with it the crisp scent of damp earth and distant pine. The stars, countless and indifferent, began to emerge in the inky blackness above, their faint light offering a subtle illumination to the sleeping camp. It was a vast, silent tableau, a testament to the enduring power of the night. The legionaries, nestled within their tents, were deep in slumber, their bodies recovering from the day's exertions. Their breathing was soft and rhythmic, a collective sigh that filled the canvas shelters. The occasional cough or restless shift was quickly absorbed by the pervasive quiet, leaving only the steady hum of an army at rest. For those on guard duty, however, the night was a time of heightened awareness. They stood at their posts, their eyes scanning the darkness, their ears attuned to the slightest sound. The changing of the guard was a silent ritual, a passing of the torch from one vigilant pair of eyes to the next. No words were exchanged, only a subtle nod, a shared understanding of the responsibility that rested upon their shoulders. The hours of the night passed slowly, marked only by the imperceptible shift of the stars across the sky. The moon, if present, cast long, ghostly shadows across the camp, transforming familiar shapes into distorted figures. The wind, a gentle whisper, rustled through the leaves of the nearby trees, creating a soft, almost hypnotic sound. These were the sounds of the night, a subtle symphony that accompanied the silent vigil of the centuries. Their thoughts, though disciplined, often drifted. They might recall memories of home, of family, of a life far removed from the constant demands of military service. Or perhaps they simply contemplated the vastness of the night, the endless expanse of the sky, the quiet solitude of their post. These were fleeting thoughts, however, quickly replaced by the immediate demands of their duty. Every shadow was a potential threat, every rustle a possible intrusion. Their senses were heightened, their minds alert, ready to respond to any sign of danger. The cold seeped into their bones, a constant reminder of the passage of time. They shifted their weight, stamped their feet, and rubbed their hands together, small movements designed to ward off the chill. But their gaze remained fixed on the darkness, their vigilance unwavering. The camp, though silent, was not entirely still. The occasional snort of a horse from the stables, the soft murmur of a distant stream, the faint creak of a tent pole in the wind, these were the subtle sounds that punctuated the quiet, a testament to the living, breathing entity that was the Roman legion. As the night deepened, a profound sense of isolation settled over the centuries. They were alone with their thoughts, alone with the vastness of the darkness, alone with the weight of their responsibility. Yet, there was also a sense of purpose, a quiet pride in their unwavering dedication. They were the guardians of the camp, the silent protectors of their sleeping comrades. Their vigilance ensured the safety and security of the entire legion. The hours before dawn were often the coldest, the darkest, and the most challenging. The body craved rest, the mind yearned for sleep, but duty demanded wakefulness. They pushed through the discomfort, their resolve unwavering, their commitment absolute. The first faint blush of dawn on the eastern horizon was a welcome sight, a subtle promise of the day to come. The darkness began to recede, replaced by a soft, gray light that gradually illuminated the camp. The shapes of the tents, once indistinct, began to sharpen, their outlines becoming clear. The sounds of the camp slowly began to awaken. The first stirrings of men, the gentle clatter of mess kits, the low murmur of voices. The night, with its silent vigil, was drawing to a close. The sentries, their duty fulfilled, would soon be relieved, their bodies weary but their minds at peace. They had stood guard, they had protected, and they had ensured the safety of their comrades. The cycle would begin anew, a relentless rhythm of duty, labor, and quiet endurance. And as the sun rose, casting its first golden rays upon the camp, the Roman legionary would awaken, refreshed and ready to face another day, another cycle of monotonous tasks, another testament to the enduring strength and resilience of the empire. The air, once thick with the silence of the night, began to fill with the subtle sounds of a waking camp. The distant crow of a rooster, the gentle lowing of cattle from a nearby farm, the soft chirping of birds in the trees. These were the harbingers of a new day, a slow awakening that mirrored the gradual return of light to the sky. The sentry, his eyes still scanning the horizon, felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a change in the quality of the air that signaled the approaching dawn. The stars, which had been so prominent just moments before, began to fade, their brilliance diminished by the encroaching light. The moon, if it had been present, would now be a pale, ghostly disk, slowly retreating from the sky. The ground beneath his feet, which had been cold and unyielding throughout the night, began to absorb the first faint warmth of the rising sun. The dew, which had clung to the grass and leaves, shimmered with a fleeting brilliance, reflecting the nascent light. The outlines of the tents, which had been indistinct shadows, now stood out in sharp relief, their canvas surfaces catching the first rays of the sun. The sounds of the camp became more distinct, more purposeful. The gentle clatter of mess kits, the low murmur of voices, the rhythmic crunch of boots on the gravelly ground, these were the sounds of men preparing for another day of duty, another cycle of labor and discipline. The sentry, his watch almost complete, felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had performed his duty, he had kept vigil, and he had ensured the safety of his comrades. The night, with its silent challenges, had been successfully navigated. Soon, he would be relieved, and he would join the ranks of his fellow legionaries, ready to face the demands of the new day. The cycle continued, an endless repetition of work, rest, and preparation, each segment flowing seamlessly into the next. The Roman legionary, a master of both warfare and construction, was also a master of endurance, his life a continuous testament to the unwavering strength and resilience of the empire. And as the sun rose, casting its first golden rays upon the camp, the Roman legionary would awaken, refreshed and ready to face another day, another cycle of monotonous tasks, another testament to the enduring strength and resilience of the empire.